Good morning, Calm 600. I hope you had a great weekend and especially a good day on Monday and are now ready to tackle the week. This is Ben Frazier, your professor, Calm 600. And this week we have an absolutely very, very strong book that really, in many ways, brings together the best of our field of communication with a very strong theological understanding and biblical understanding of our field. And so Quentin Schultz is actually a friend of mine. He used to teach at Calvin College. He just recently retired from there. He's kind of young, so I have a feeling he's going to be teaching many other places and continuing to write. Relatively young, probably not as young as some of you, but to me he seems young. At any rate, an excellent book, and so I wanted to just introduce this book to you a little bit. I know it's early in the week, so you probably haven't finished reading it, but do take the time to read it. I think it's one of the most important books in this class. It's a bit dated, needs to be updated, especially when we deal with the media part later in the book, but what Quentin is talking about here primarily is the interaction of communication and our faith, particularly communication in our culture. How does communication nurture culture? And he really gets this idea from Genesis 1, 26 and 27, which is the cultural mandate, that we are here on earth not just to evangelize, but to nurture and to strengthen and to bring healing and truth to the larger culture, whether they believe or not. We have a calling to nurture and build that culture. And we do this, of course, as human beings through the symbols we use. Much of what I see happening in this book comes through very close to a theory that is prominent in our field called symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism says this, that whatever else man is, we're made in the image of God, those kinds of things, but man is also a symbol, now this is important, creating symbol-using beings. The symbols are those things that make up words and language, and also images and nonverbal behavior, and all those kinds of things that we read and that have meaning and understanding for us. And so we are called to be and to share these symbols. And so symbolic interaction says these symbols begin to help not only construct our culture, but construct our own lives. Now, I realized this years ago when I was a minister working in a church, and one of the things that happened is many of the young people, I was a youth minister for a while, and many of the young people would come, and some of the most beautiful young women in our church would come and really think that they had serious problems and felt themselves to be ugly and not beautiful. And I realized from that experience that the church is called to come around, and they were beautiful. They were absolutely gorgeous, young and beautiful, and yet they didn't feel like they were, and they didn't think they were. And I go, where are you getting these ideas from? And through my discussions with them, I began to realize that the culture itself provides a diet of lies through advertising and images and billboards and magazines and on television and movies and those sort of things, that you have to look a certain way and have a certain feel and own certain kinds of things. And these are the things that make you a beautiful person. And of course, this just comes against what Scripture says and what the church is. And so I see the function of the church as described in many places, particularly in the New Testament, but in Romans 12, 1 and 2, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what does it mean to renew your mind? It means, and then if you notice the rest of that chapter in Romans, deals with the church and the gifting of the church and the use of those gifts within the church community. And it seems to me that what Paul is really talking about there is not some kind of quick fix or something that happens to you, but it really is that the church functioning properly helps us redefine or helps us define who we are. that we are loved, that we are called of God, that we are loved of God, that we are called and are good. Now, you and I both know this in more practical ways. If you take a child, and I have actually seen this done in my work in inner city, and you tell that child that they are stupid, and both directly and indirectly, you, as that child is growing up over and over again, he hears this word that he's not very smart, he can't do very well in school. What do you think the chances are of that child doing very well in school are? Well, some overcome that and still can, but for the most part, the community coming together and saying education is important or that you're not able to achieve will often as not, create in that child an expectation and a definition that they're not going to do well. And sure enough, in those kinds of communities, children do not do well. Why is that? Is that because they are not smart? More likely answer is that because we react to things not on the basis of how reality is, how they really are, but on the basis of the community and the symbols that surround us and tell us how we are supposed to think and how we are supposed to think about. Now, symbolic interactionism says that the community, our interaction with our friends, our relatives, our parents, our schools, our churches, all these things feed into the media, feed into telling us what the world is like and what our place is in the world. Now, you can see that the world over and over again is feeding us a bunch of lies. It says unless you're a certain weight and a certain height, have a certain look, have access and own certain kinds of material things, that unless you have those things, you'll be happy. And it's called advertising. Advertising over and over again is not trying to tell us information as much as give us a feeling about those things and a desire to need those things so that those things then will make us happy. And in fact, we find out that those things usually do not make us happy. So so what Quentin Schultz is talking about in this work is that symbolic stewardship, that we as the church have to help our young people and our old people and everyone define reality, know who they really are. And so for me as a minister, I had to tell these young people, listen, we need to speak into their lives. And as they came for counseling and for services and that sort of thing, emphasize that they are beautiful, that they are good, they are loved by God, and He sees that they're good, and have that be the atmosphere in which they define who they are and what they can contribute. How people behave is not necessarily how reality is, but how their view or image of reality is. And this was done in a study one time, looking at people who watch a great amount of television and people who watch more television, which tends to have negative programming, thought that the world was a lot more dangerous place. Now, it didn't really matter if a person lived in a dangerous place or a safe place. What mattered to these people when they did the research and the surveys on this was how much television they watched, how much media they were consuming. And those that consumed more media tended to think that the world was a more dangerous place, regardless of how it really was or where they lived. So the impression or the image they have overrides the reality that they existed and lived in. And what we have to do in a world that feeds it seems to me, in a world that is made up of a bunch of lies, is that we need to come along and use our communication stewardship. Communication, and another term I hope you look for is a symbolic generosity, where we are generous, we're forgiving, we're loving, and we then redefine people that fits more closely to echo God's reality, the reality that people are loved and made good and made meaningful in the presence of God. So look for symbolic generosity, but don't only just look for it. I hope that this class teaches us to behave differently, to act differently, to actually be generous symbolically to other people with those symbols that are affirming the true, the good, and the beautiful within our culture. And that we can be a part of our culture making those kinds of messages to affirm, yes, to evangelize, yes, to tell people about the Lord, but also to affirm who people are and their place in this life, and that they are loved and that they are good, loved by God. Also, there's a couple other things I'd like you to look. I won't have time to introduce now, but look at the transmission model. I think he spends a chapter on that. And the cultural view by James Carey, very important. I really like that cultural view, but most of the communication theory books talk about the transmission view, and I'm sure you're familiar certainly with that one and maybe both of them. And I want you to read this book, take it seriously. I think it integrates our field very well with the church. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have our first book review due, and so I want to just alert you with that. Not next week. Next week, we're reading The Unchristian, and that is a very interesting study. It's not a lot of reading, but all the readings are online that I'll provide for you for next week. This week, I want you really just to focus on this book by Quentin Schultz. Well, God bless you. I hope you have a great week. Hope you had a great holiday, a good rest, and now ready to tackle this week. Bye-bye.